And this is something pretty crucial about Buddha. You know, if I'm a Christian, and I'm not being rude, I'm just showing the differences here. If I'm a Christian, I would assert that God, you know, Jesus Christ said this and this and this, and therefore that's how it is, you know. And that therefore what is called Christianity is the way things are because Jesus, God, made it this way. So morality is abiding by the laws of God, you know. And immorality is disobeying the laws of God. That's how you define it. As a Catholic friend of mine said, what sin is that which goes against the will of God. So that fits with the view of a creator, doesn't it? Perfectly. Well, the Buddha's view is really more similar to what we call the scientific view. It's surprising because we don't think like this, you know. So when we hear about gravity, who was that chap with the apple? What was his name? Mr. Isaac Newton, thank you very much. So we all know, don't we, that Mr. Newton didn't invent gravity. He didn't. I mean, we think he's a wacko if he said, well, I decided I think gravity's how things are because I had some vision yesterday and you better believe it. You know, he'd be out the door in 1 minute. We know that what Newton is a person who observed it to be so. That's how, you know, observed this, and he came to certain conclusions, therefore this. And so then he presented it. Well, that's what Buddha's doing. That's what Buddha's doing. And so, like with, you know, Mr. Newton, you don't just shove it down and think, well, that's how things are, I better believe it. Oh, my goodness, I'll go to hell if I don't. You work it out. You get to see what Newton's talking about. You try to understand from your own experience the meaning of gravity. You try to see it yourself. Well, that's the Buddha's approach. That's the Buddha's approach, you know. So you can quite literally say, he's not saying believe this or don't. And okay, we use that in religious terms, don't we? What is your belief system? We call it a belief system. It's almost a synonym for a spiritual path, isn't it? A belief system. But you don't use that term in science. What's your belief about how things are? Oh, you believe in gravity. Oh, that's cool. I believe in gravity. No, you don't. Oh, come on, don't be ridiculous. You know, of course apples won't fall if you drop them up and go, you know. So we have to know it's either the truth or it's not. And this is something I think interesting because when we think of Buddhism, we don't think like this. We tend to think of Buddhism as this sort of this kind of people watch their navels and somehow become happy people. You know, they kind of close their eyes or they watch their breath usually, or they become very mindful people, and that's why you get a nice person like the Dalai Lama who's a very happy chap and he never criticises his enemies and doesn't want to you know, drop bombs on them because he's a nice man because he must watch his breath very nicely or something like this. It's a little bit cliched, okay? It's a little bit simplistic and kind of completely insulting, really. Not that Buddha cares, to what Buddha's saying. He is saying a lot more than be mindful. Believe me. It's a bit like thinking that the point of basketball is to bounce the ball. You kind of miss the point there. Bouncing the ball does play a role, but it's hardly the point, you know. So this is the approach to even to listen to what you're hearing here. And again, and on the other hand, if you've heard it 1,000 times before, listen to it as if you've never heard it before. Hear it freshly. Because one of the ways they talk in Buddhism, especially the Tibetan approach, is that part of the process of practice is to listen to, quotes, what Buddha said, you know, in order to taste it, to get the experience, like hearing again and again. Come on, tell me again. Tell me again about that apple. Come on. So you really hear it and you contemplate it. And then you eventually go, I get it, having thought about it. That's very much the approach, one approach to what's called Buddhist practice. You listen to the words and then don't just leave them up here in the brain, but you kind of have them, you digest them. You taste them and digest them until eventually they kind of come from the head to the heart, where they become real, where you get the direct experience, like of gravity or whatever, but of karma, of whatever it is that Buddha is saying is how things are. So this cause and effect one is really the essential, the defining characteristic, I think, of, you know, of Buddha's teachings. That indicates his main approach, cause and effect. So we can talk about it in the more immediate terms about our own very life. Okay, you know, we can say. I mean, I haven't pursued the other point yet about who am I. I'll discuss this. But this one right here, right now in my daily life, one of the things that probably, you know, propels us to a place like this is this kind of wish to be happy, wish to be more useful, wish to make my life beneficial, maybe to understand the meaning of life, but we don't often, well, we certainly think that, I think, because we all have these questions, don't we? you know, you have a few minutes spare, in the back of our mind somewhere inside are these questions. What is the purpose of life? Where do things come from? Blah, blah, blah. Or the so-called big questions. And Buddha says we must ask these questions. And indeed, we need to find the answers, you know. So right here and now, in terms of happiness and suffering, where does cause and effect fit? Where does that fit? Well, this is where Buddha would have very strong, you know, philosophical arguments with us and say that the views that we all hold now, generally speaking, and let's look at those views, he would say that we are mistaken in our assessment. He's not being moralistic. He's not saying you're a bad person for thinking the wrong thing, which is how we think in spiritual terms. He doesn't talk like that. He's simply saying we're mistaken. It's like you've got the wrong view of what gravity is. You're wrong. You're not kind of a naughty person. You're just simply mistaken. You've got the wrong understanding of the law, you know. So this natural law called karma, this natural law called cause and effect, the basic principle is it comes right down to where this plays out. First and foremost is in the human mind, in the mind, not just the human, but here we're talking us humans, but this refers to all living beings, and Buddha has a much broader understanding of a living being. The term they use in Tibetan, for example, for this sentient or living being, the term in Tibetan is sentient, mind possessor. So the Buddha would say there are countless mind possessors. There's not an atom of space where you won't find mind possessors, living beings, sentient beings. And humans are just a tiny percentage of those. So Buddha's laws refer to all these beings. Buddha isn't just confining himself to the human beings, which is, for example, would be the Christian view, because only humans have what Christians would call a soul. Whereas Buddha doesn't discuss, first of all, doesn't use the word soul. He talks in terms of the mind, consciousness, which for Buddha is not the brain, is not physical, is dependent upon for its working, you know, to be a working, reasonable mind. We indeed need a working brain, you know. But Buddha would say they're not the same. This is one first point that's quite clear from the Buddhist perspective, which certainly needs thinking about and contemplating, because it's not our immediate experience, because we don't see it. Buddha, secondly, and we don't see it because, secondly, Buddha would say our mind, our consciousness is not physical. It's not the brain, but it's not physical. So this is where you could say Buddha really agrees with the other religious views. They assert soul, which is non-physical. So Buddha would agree there is something non-physical, but he would say it's the mind itself. It's all your thoughts, feelings, emotions, unconscious, subconscious, the whole deal. This is mind in Buddhism. This is consciousness. And it's not physical. And the law of cause and effect plays out first and foremost. It starts in the mind. It starts in the mind. In fact, there's a word, intention, when you study Buddhist psychology. The word intention, the mind engaging in something, the intention to do something within the mind, or to bring the body and speech into play and to act it out. This intention is virtually synonymous, actually, with this word karma. And the word literally is Sanskrit. It means action, action. But it has this very dynamic implication of reaction. So it's the cause and effect, action, reaction, cause, effect, seed, fruit, you know, this dynamic idea. This is the law, Buddha says. This is the basic law that determines the experiences of every sentient, of every living being. Therefore, of the universe. You know, living beings are the occupants of universes, aren't they? So another characteristic about this consciousness of ours, this mind, where the law of cause and effect plays itself out, emanates from, is that, and this is again a distinctive point that Buddha's making, is that it doesn't come from anyone else. And this is where Buddha would disagree with with the materialists and with all the other religious views. I mean, in fact, you could say a materialist has far more in common, in one sense, with a Christian than with a Buddhist view, from one point of view. From the point of view of cause and effect, definitely that.
Land of Medicine Buddha is a green-certified, non-profit retreat center located in Santa Cruz County, offering Buddhist classes and retreats and space for personal retreats, as well as rental facilities for private groups to hold their own spiritual workshops, conferences, and trainings. Please visit us online at www.landofmedicinebuddha.org.